A partisan network operating inside of Russia now has turned Russia's rails and its power lines into battlefields. Atesh's targets are generally small. They're the unguarded relay boxes, the relay cabinets, the substations, the signaling equipment. But one burned relay box can empty Moscow's gasoline within days. You see, Atesh is very tuned to where the critical nodes are for Russia, or what to attack to make sure that Russia comes to a standstill. So aside from the Ukrainian drone strikes, which are ongoing and increasing, partisans right now inside of Russia are causing sabotage that has transpired into a fuel crisis across the country. Just look at the attacks near Yekaterinburg. That's about 1,400 kilometers, 870 miles east of Moscow. They were able to slow down the trains that were passing through that, but that means that the crude, which was also passing, was brought to a stop. The ammunition meant for the front, it was also brought to a standstill. Because one disabled box forces delays along all of the key corridors of Russia. That means that the cities are cut off, as are the front lines. So today, Russia is forced into a very difficult situation. A decision must be made. Will their security forces be used to guard their borders or to guard their relay boxes? This is draining manpower just to keep the trains moving. The great irony of this is that these men now are guarding the hardware, which is meant for automation, which is meant to make things easier. But now, due to the dependence on that, due to the fact that the entire logistics system of Russia is so brittle, there's no other choice. These men are being pulled from the front, being pulled from guarding their own borders to guard against partisans within Russia. My name is Jason Smart, and I'm a special correspondent for the Kiev Post. And for the past 15 years, I've actively worked with the Russian opposition to Vladimir Putin, for which I was thrown out of Russia and not allowed to return for life because I'm considered to be a national security threat. And sure enough, the Putin regime is more than just an enemy. It was the subject for my master's and my PhD dissertations. But what we're seeing right now inside of Russia is actually unique. It's not common in Russian history. This is special because there's not been a long history, certainly not in the past 100 years, of partisan groups operating inside the country. Groups of men willing to risk life and limb to overthrow the Putin regime. And we see the results. It's not just a myth. This is not just stories pumped up by the Ukrainians. These are videos posted online of increasing attacks. We saw the one in June cutting off the trains that were able to service Crimea. We saw the ones in May that occurred in Moscow Oblast, which cut off the military communications. We saw another one that occurred just last month against Russia's ability to supply southern Ukraine, the occupied territories. Atesh is going after the very nodes that make Russia's ability to occupy Ukraine or to operate in their own country impossible. These acts of sabotage are very low risk, but the high impact is simply incredible. It's destroying Russia's ability to operate as a country or as a military force. It's forcing Russia to try to find alternatives. However, for railway systems, there's not a lot of alternatives. They have a line, it's very long, and if it breaks down along the way, or if it gets blown up, or if the relay boxes no longer function, then things get very complicated. So for Atesh, today we're seeing that they are able to effectively stop Russia's ability to continue operating. Atesh is turning these boxes of copper and these circuits into Russia's greatest weakness. These rail delays are rolling into disasters for the refineries, which are simultaneously being struck by the Ukrainian drones. But the slower rails means that the crude is going to arrive late. It means that the tank farms overflow. It means that the refineries slip on their maintenance, and all of this is happening as demand is peaking. Every missed train means that the refineries are going to run hotter, less efficiently, and raise the risk of outages. This is all putting more stress on an already brittle and old system, one that needed repairs long ago and cannot keep up with this increased demand. We see that for the Russians, things are not going to get better soon, though, because these attacks are not something they can stop. So far, nobody from Atesh has been caught within Russia. This is despite the fact that there have been dozens of attacks. Last year and the year before, we saw there were attacks on Russian military bases inside of Russia. And increasingly, just a couple of months ago, there was an attack on a base in Russia. But what's interesting about it was this. It wasn't on the exterior, rather it was the interior. That means that somebody entered into the sensitive part of the base and was able to attack Russian aircraft, which is only likely to happen if it was somebody from within the Russian military who did the attack. Because who else would be allowed onto a military base, onto a sensitive part of the military base? So within Russia, there's clearly something going wrong. They understand that they are able to rebuild the refineries. It takes time, and sometimes it might actually be impossible, but most often they can. But what happens when a partisan group is making it possible to even transport the fuel that you have? You have a limited supply, and you have a lot less after they pay you a visit. So right now we see that the insurers are adding more risk premiums that everything Russia does. That means that the oil, it's becoming less of an asset for Russia. The higher premiums are sort of like a silent sanction. They're draining the Russian economy. The higher cost of oil in Russia, which is quite high. To give you an idea, AI 92, which is Russia's regular gasoline, comparable to the US's 87 octane, it's currently trading for about $140 per ton in St. Petersburg. By comparison, in the United States, it trades for about $700 a ton. That shows you how clearly these attacks are affecting Russia. But it's not just that. Entire cities of Russia, as you've seen reported, are now saying they do not have gasoline. This is not just a little problem. This means that everything comes to a stop. Because it's not just an inconvenience for the people that want to go to work or to go shop, but why would you go to work if there's nothing to sell there? If there's nothing to do there, because nobody else can get to work, because the buses don't operate. There's nothing to do in your store because the trucks no longer operate, so there's nothing to sell. This is creating scarcity across Russia. And what's interesting is the economic effect of this. Because when the fuel becomes scarce, finances begin to lock up behind them. The buyers demand prepayment, freezing capital for weeks, and that slows down business. Cash flows dry up, and for small distributors, it becomes a disaster because they see that right now creditors are raising the collateral demands. They're increasing costs on every truckload, on every train slot. Financing fuel has become, in fact, a hard option for the Russians. It is very difficult to do. So what began as simply an empty pump is becoming empty balance sheets. Liquidity risk spreads from the stations to the lenders. This is all affecting how Russians live. And it's not just the military. We see that, sure, this affects the military as well. And not receiving supplies, and as we've discussed many times, the Russian military, it needs oil, a lot of it. And not just for its tanks, but also it's the diesel that is produced from the oil that is then used to supply the trains. More than 70% of Russian goods for their military go by train. So when the trains can't operate, when the trains are cut off by a Tesh, or when Ukraine attacks a refinery and so the cost of diesel goes up, it means the Russian government can send less. The Russian government does not have the same capacity to supply this war. So let's think about that. Though it seems to be unrelated issues, they're very related. A Tesh is destroying the means of transport, but it's a means of transport often that are used in the occupation or in the production of oil or other key items. But when you have the Ukrainians simultaneously making it possible for the Russians to produce more fuel, it means that they're working together in tandem. Though not planned, it's worked out very well. Because on one side, it's making it possible for Russia to make what it needs. But on the other side, it's making it impossible to receive or to transport those same things. But combined, one after the other, it is the 1-2 punch. It is making it impossible for Russia to operate. We see that Russia's industries are all being affected. Large ones like the aviation industry, already in significant decline, are having more problems than ever. They can't afford to get around the sanctions, but now the fuel is simply too expensive. And common people can't afford airplane tickets. They cannot afford train tickets. They can't afford basic goods because they are getting more expensive by the day. So what we see today is that Russia is in a difficult situation. And interesting enough, just later this week, I will be again meeting with my old friend, Ilya Ponomarov. As you know, Ilya was on the channel just a few days ago. Ilya is a former Russian member of parliament. He was the only one to have voted against the annexation of Crimea back in 2014. As a result, he had to flee Russia and has lived abroad for now this entire period of time, and is a citizen of Ukraine now and is actively working to support Ukraine. But he's also active in organizations within Russia seeking to overthrow the Putin regime. Ilya and I share a very strong opinion that the Putin regime will not stop until it is stopped. The Putin regime must be brought to its knees. It must be broken. Because this war will not end. It definitively will not end as long as Vladimir Putin remains in power. As long as Vladimir Putin remains in the Kremlin, this war will continue. So the need to stop Putin is not something that's only good for Ukraine. It's something that's very necessary for global security. Looking ahead, Russia's imperialist ambitions won't go away. They will continue. They will not stop. If it's happened for centuries, it's unlikely to stop all of a sudden. It's more likely to stop, though, once they lose a war, once they realize that the cost is simply too high. This is a game they cannot afford to pay. And that's why these partisan groups, these groups operating inside of Russia, are so important, because they're making it impossible for the Putin regime to fight. And if they can't fight, that increases the risk, that increases the probability that they will lose troops and they will lose battles, and eventually they will lose the war. Because inside of Russia, the public sentiment is changing. And not only do we not see strong support for the 3-day special military operation, we see the population wants to see the end of this war. They don't want to see the continuation of a war which has taken over 1 million of their young men, either killed or maimed them, and achieved nothing. But even more cynically, they don't want to keep paying so much at the pump or for goods. It's that where we see them complaining the most. So though there was such a huge loss of Russian life, the part that so alarms the society, the part that so worries them, is the fact that life has become so expensive. But they also worry about the unpredictability, the fact that they are not sure what will happen next. Will there be another drone strike? Will there be another attack? What will happen next? And nobody is quite sure. So for Vladimir Putin, he's in a difficult situation. He has started a war, an illegal campaign, an invasion of a foreign country. He is in charge of the most sanctioned country in the history of the world, and he himself is wanted by the International Criminal Court. So, though it's not clear what will happen next, we can be assured of this. When we look at the data, the hard facts, not the subjective views, but the hard objective data, it's very clear that Russia, it's not only losing this war, Russia's becoming destabilized. Russia is becoming a high-risk case. And that means that Vladimir Putin himself is at very high risk. So pay attention to these attacks. Check out what Atesh is doing. Check out the other organizations inside of Russia actively seeking to overthrow the Putin regime. And think of how that works so well hand in hand with the ongoing attacks by Ukraine on Russia's oil industry, on the very nodes that allow Russia to operate. And when you see how well they work together, it's hard to come to the conclusion that things are going bad for Russia. Things are going horrifically for Russia. It's not just bad anymore. And that's why we should have some optimism. Things look like they're getting better. And it looks like the pumps in Russia will be getting drier. Thank you for watching. Please like this video. Please subscribe to this channel. And consider becoming a channel member today. As always, thank you for supporting Ukraine.